Thanks to Schaefer for sponsoring the Knowledge stage. My name is Kim Winter. I'm the Global Managing Director of Logistics Executive Group. Our main office is in Dubai, and we've had some very interesting supply chain issues about 90 kilometres from where I live in a sea lane called the Straits of Hormuz. It's all good fun. I haven't checked Mr. Trump's Truth Social today to find out what's happened today, but I'm sure it's all still very exciting. Nonetheless, all very resilient and a lot of fun if you like that sort of stuff. So today, kicking off the afternoon, we're going to be talking about automation, and is not the starting point.
Attention visitors, we hope you're enjoying your day. Speaking sessions at both the Knowledge Theatre and Innovation stage will resume shortly. So now is the perfect time to make your way there. At 1:20 p.m. on the Knowledge Theatre, hear from Argan & Co. as they share valuable industry insights and practical strategies for today's supply chain challenges. And over at the Innovation stage, find out more about
just what I was going to say
innovation and what it means to SMEs starting now. Take your seats.
Thanks, Blake. Okay, very good. So without further ado, we've got Primo Donatella from the associate partner from Argon. We just had a good chat. Some very interesting things about this young man over here. Primo has done a lot of things in the supply chain, not the least of which was operating deep underground in a coal mine for a while. I don't think he's going to talk about that today, but welcome him on board, and he's going to have a talk about the latest investments in logistics. Thanks, mate.
What a nice intro that was. Thank you, Kim. So today, as Kim alluded to, I'm going to be talking about how automation isn't the starting point. And I think it's not about whether automation matters, because it clearly does. I think what we need to focus on is what's the real question around where we're investing and is it in the right thing. Now, I think all of us know that businesses are under pressure. They're focusing on, costs, they're focusing on labour availability, they're focusing on service responsiveness. But just because there's that operating pressure and you're reacting to that doesn't mean that that's a strategy. And I think what makes this, the shift that I want to unpack today is really about automation's not the starting point, the business outcome is. And I think let's start why this topic matters so much now. And as you can see here, automation, the logistics automation, and this is just intralogistics automation, is accelerating. So we've got a 14.8% compounded annual growth rate. So from 2040 to 2034, we're going to get around to $140 billion global market, which is across your AMRs, your AGVs, and also including the tech stacks such as your WCS and What this means is that with that increase, the growth is driven by that operating pressure. It's not just technology excitement. So it's not the new shiny thing that's come out. It's trying to ameliorate some of these pressures that we're starting to feel. Now, I think the thing that I'm trying to make clear here is that just because we've got a really fast-growing market doesn't mean that that should be creating urgency. What we should be focusing on is the total business value that we can create from automation. But there's a lot of steps to happen before that. I think we need to think about, okay, we've got labour pressure, we've got service expectations. Are we meeting, whether you're consumer or B2B? Are we meeting those service levels? Are we giving the right product in the right quantity at the right time in the right condition to the right place? As we start growing our business, we're starting to see SKU and channel complexity. So, we're getting more products. Our customers are wanting more options, and they're wanting it through different channels. The other part as well is that automation is great because when we start looking at our capacity constraints, can we reduce our footprint? Can we prolong the current facility that we're in? Or when we move to the next facility, can we get some capital avoidance? Because we're able to shrink the current inventory footprint that we need based on the growth that we're looking at. I think the last part as well is that what's making this grow so quickly is that the maturity of the technology now is at a point where it's tried and tested. Even you've got your mechanization, you've got your automation in regards to ASRS, AGVs, AMRs. They're now tried and tested. And that's driving even more of a demand because we're starting to see real life applications done, implemented in the workplace and starting to give that ROI. The big part here is what I want to try and focus on though, and as I alluded to before, is that automation isn't the starting point. The business outcome needs to be focused on first, and we don't want to be too narrow on a particular solution. So just because we've got a certain level of desire to put in a limited amount, a piece of technology, that can narrow the total value business pool, narrow the total value pool of what the solution could look like. What we need to be really thinking about is, what's the customer promise that we've signed up for and that we're telling our customers? What cost position are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to increase margin? Are we trying to lower our operating costs? What capacity constraints are we currently experiencing, and what do we want to? What's the lever that we want to try and pull so that way we can release that constraint? I think the big thing here is that automation isn't the starting point. It's very much a part of the answer, but it needs to be shaped around a whole of business solution or a business outcome. So it's about trying to go from, trying to automate a certain site level piece of technology to now focusing on what does that look like across my broader business. Because if you don't, you start to fall into the automation trap. And what the automation trap is really, and I think this is a great diagram, is that there's the things that we normally look at are above the waterline. So this iceberg, we're looking at, warehouse, we're looking at a warehouse decision, we're looking at certain technology choice, and we're looking at a site level business case. Those are the common things that I see, and that's what everyone sort of looks at. So they look at a node in a warehouse and they go, okay, well, what's the productivity I can get out of my shed? What's the labor arbitrage or the cost reduction to pay for this technology, and how can I improve my service level? But what's not looked at enough, and what I think is often missed, is when we're looking at automation, we don't want to just be looking at that one site or that one piece of technology. We actually need to have a broader view, and that needs to look at what is the network, how is that currently serving my customers. So we start with the customer in mind. Does that need to change? What does the product flow look like? What is the inventory holdings in each node as we build that out? And then it's then thinking about, is our systems ready? Do we have the right level of data? Do we have the right processor to be able to automate already? And then how does a decision like this affect our workforce capability across the entire network? And I think those are the biggest things that often get missed. One of the clutches when I see automation business cases and automation or logistics transformation get rolled out, is people also often forget, okay, we put this technology in, but how do we maintain it? What does that look like for us as a business? Whether it's the maintenance model, it's the upkeep, it's a servicing from the vendors, who does what, and how much does that cost? The spare parts, the corrective maintenance, but then also the predictive maintenance as well. So over the life of the asset, you're going to have to do overhauls and replace, certain components. All of this comes together, including, what's above the line and what's below the line. That becomes the end-to-end value of what automation should look like. It's not just about making a warehouse decision and going, all right, if I put in this piece of equipment, technology, asset, whatever term you want to use, what productivity can I get out of it? It's more about thinking, if you can, what business outcomes am I looking for? Better service? Am I looking for, lower cost of labour? Am I looking for, better volume metrics in my transport to reduce my transport costs? Those are the things that we should be focusing on. So, where this goes is that essentially the questions change. It's instead of being what should we automate, it's what business performance outcome are we trying to unlock. So again, don't focus on the warehouse and the technology and who the vendor is. That's part, but it's okay, what service levels do we need to meet? What cost targets are we trying to achieve? Is there capacity issues based on our growth forecast that we don't need to just look at from, a DC point of view, but what does that look like for our network? But then also, is there other whether it's upstream, the way that we source, that may shape the actual network itself, and then therefore change the type of automation that we need? And then also, focusing in on resilience and sustainability. So how can we make sure when we put this technology into play, are we getting resilience from our operations? Are we getting a quicker time to recover? Are we getting a longer time to survive? And then from a sustainability point of view, as we put this into place, are we making sure that we're leaving the operation with a greener footprint? So I think as I've sort of stacked on all of this right now, it's not just automation being the answer. It's a part of the answer, and it's a layer in a bigger system. And the way that we look at this, or the way that I look at this, and I think a lot of businesses should, is really about where do we start with the business strategy? And that business strategy normally has a commercial implication. It's going to be looking at who are our customers, where do we win with them, where do we play, and how do we execute on that. That execution piece is really the network and the flow. How are we sourcing the products and it's going to flow through? And then the operating model is actually how we're going to make it run, whether it's with people, technology, AI now, and what decision rights, what governance layers, and how does that all get stitched together from your strategy and your network model. The piece that often sort of dictates some of the success in the start of the go live is really around your systems and data and what access and clean that is. But I think now you can see that there's a chain of events or a sequence of activities and a thought process that needs to happen before we just look at the automation. So rather than looking at your shed within the four walls and going, okay, well, I just want to automate picking, there might be a broader case there. Now, there's always a counter argument, but there's always the option for optimization and what that could look like, and then that continuous improvement. And there is options for that available, and I'll touch on that now, but I think as where we are at the moment, it's 2026, Logistics 4.0 isn't just about what we can automate, it's really about how do we improve the system around us, because the whole business is now running on your supply chain and your logistics function to make sure it executes the customer promise. So, as I was talking about the optimize, transform, or orchestrate, now this is a busy slide, and I get that, and I think one of the big things here is that I want to try and allude to is that there is businesses that will optimize and they'll put certain levels of optimization in, and that's that continuous improvement lens, which makes things easier. And then you can start looking at what cobotics or AMRs that you can put in certain work cells. But then there's also a transformation piece where businesses need to make a big step change. The transformation normally comes into play when your future operating model, your future network design, your future strategy isn't aligned with what you have today. And that's where you need to make a big leap. Now, there is one part here where, as we're starting to see with Logistics 4.0, as it changes, and that's really the orchestration piece. Depending whether you're optimizing or transforming, then there's an orchestration piece that means that you can improve the current model, and you can start to look at an orchestration layer that is making better informed decisions. Right now, the maturity isn't there for businesses to be able to do that enterprise-wide. It's very select within certain functions of your business, or certain, silos of each function as well. But within the next 12 to 24 months, we're going to be, depending on the maturity of your business, we're going to be able to make those leaps and bounds to be making sure that we are now orchestrating whether an optimized automation environment or an optimized transformation environment. I think what we need to figure out is, are we looking to improve the current network? Are we looking to make sure that we can get some incremental gains? That's really the optimization piece. But if we're looking at really rebuilding because the fundamental customer mindset has changed, the distribution model, the business model's changed, that's then when we start going to transformation. And then with the orchestration, that's how we adapt. So I think just to sort of finalize, Logistics 4.0, it's not about buying more technology. Automation doesn't need to, it's not the starting point, and it's an answer of. What we're really looking at is how do we increase the business capability so that way we can perform, adapt and improve. Because when we automate, and depending on what we automate, we can actually introduce rigidity into our network, There's, there could be large investments made in certain distribution centres or customer fulfilment centres where you can't change the types of products that go through that quite easily. There could be a certain amount of volume that needs to flow through that network, which is actually inefficient compared to what could be if you redesign the network before you decide to automate that distribution centre or CFC. The old lens, from my view and what I'm seeing in the market and doing a lot of the business cases that I'm doing now, is the old lens focuses more on technology. It's going, okay, what do we automate now? How can I get that labour cost saving? And what are the functional operational KPIs that we need to meet to make the business case stack up? Where it's moved to over the past, I'd say, year or 2 years, it's really about whole of business value. Now, if you're a centralised fulfilment model, that may have a different shape to where if you're a decentralised fulfilment model. But essentially, what we're looking at now, business outcome first. What's the commercial advantage we're trying to get? What's the network-wide value? So that's transport. That's, if you have branches, that's, benefits in branches. If you have stores, that's benefits in stores. The decision advantage, so by putting in certain automation across your network, what is that going to look like and what decisions can you make moving forward? What does the workforce look like and how can we augment it? Meaning, do we need to change the shape, whether it's a more maintenance-driven, technical skilled workforce to just operators? And then what level of commercial impact, inclusive of resilience and sustainability, are we going to be able to achieve? That's now the view, because automation, although it's come down in cost and there is different commercial models such as robots as a service or pay per pick, it's still a large capital investment with everything else that needs to go with it, not just that single technology. So you want to be making sure that you're getting that business case right or that investment decision right. So we don't. Our approach or my approach now is really not about trying to optimize certain assets, but it's about trying to optimize the decisions that you make when you invest. I think, just to close here is the winners won't automate the most. You don't need to be full on lights out, DCs or CFCs to be able to have the lowest cost. If you're not getting the full capacity utilization, the full throughput utilization, it doesn't matter if it's a completely lights out DC. I think that's some of the things. You can have an underperforming asset that doesn't do well for your business, and that's because you decided to automate one at a site level. And I think that's really the crux of what I'm trying to get through here. Now, I don't know if we have time for questions, but if there's any questions, I'll answer one or two. And if not, if you like what you saw, you can follow me on LinkedIn as well.
You do have time for questions.
Yeah.
Plenty of time. Yeah.
Is there any questions?
I was just going to ask, what kind of examples have you seen where it's gone wrong, where a company's just, someone in particular loves the idea of automation, wants the robots, but they've actually just not really driven the value?
I'll give you a really good example, actually. So, a transformation project that I did a couple of years ago. We were consolidating 3 warehouses and building, a fully automated distribution centre, semi-automated with conveyor sortation. The client had already bought a sortation system, an inbound sortation system, and they wanted us to retrofit that into the new design. What that looked like was, because they had spent, I think it was $700,000 or $800,000 on it, they wanted to make sure that they utilised it, but there was no need. After we'd put that in place, what we actually found was that it limited the productivity, because one of the other things is we didn't have SSCC scanning and labelling from the suppliers integrated with EDI, so therefore the actual inbound sortation couldn't work properly. So again, that was a shiny bit of kit that the businesses bought, and they wanted to make sure that they could use, but there was all these other factors outside of the 4 walls that we couldn't make the automation work. Gentlemen over here, we're making you work for your money today.
Slow on the mark, mate. I'm just not used to this.
That's all right. Thank you. Very interesting, your emphasis on the business decision. What proportion of total costs, and I mean life cycle costs, associated with the business process re-engineering and ongoing support versus the capital components, the capex component?
Yeah, that's one of those things. It's like, how long is a piece of string, right? It's going to depend on the complexity of the business, the legacy systems, how mature they are in certain processes. I think what you'll find, the initial sort of resourcing and solution design, and I think is probably a couple of percent of the capital investment, right? So, but it's going to depend on what you're looking at, if it's a transformation initiative, full overhaul of your network, plus a DC build, plus the automation fit out, new WMS, new WCS, all that sort of stuff, or if it's just you putting in a certain, a small, like maybe a Cobotics AMR solution, which can be retrofitted pretty quickly.
Does that answer the question?
I don't know if it gave him the answer that he wanted. It was more
Yeah, it was probably a bit of that, but I suppose at some point of time, it's the business decision driving it, isn't it? So you have to quarantine a whole lot of stuff, and you have very clear costs. I got to do these things to business process, to re-engineer the business. I've got to make decisions on what I'm going to depreciate my assets over.
Yeah.
Is it a computer thing, therefore lower life cycle of, hard stuff, 20 years. So I suppose when you look at it all in that sense, there is a very finite thing of how much, what tips the cost scale, which then affects your answer.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I think he's walked off now. He's a busy man. Is there any other questions? I'll take that. Going once, going twice. I feel like I'm an auctioneer. All right. All right, sold. All right, thank you everyone. Thank you so much.